The frigid wind howled across the snow-blanketed village of Hrafnheim, carrying with it the metallic scent of impending doom. Eirik Brazo-de-Corvo knelt beside Thora's lifeless body, her golden hair splayed across the crimson-stained snow like rays of a setting sun. Her delicate hand remained clenched around a torn fragment of parchment, the runes upon it barely visible through the bloodstains. In the distance, the rhythmic pounding of shields and war cries echoed between the frost-covered hills, growing closer with each passing moment. The Skald's calloused fingers trembled as they hovered above the young woman's peaceful face, his dark eyes wide with horror and understanding. Everything he had feared had come to pass. The secret was out, and blood had already been spilled. 24 hours earlier, dawn had broken reluctantly over Hrafnheim. Eirik awakened to the familiar scent of pine smoke mingling with the crisp winter air that seeped through the cracks of his modest dwelling. His dreams had been troubled again, fragments of ancient verses and warnings swirling like ravens before a storm. At 32 winters, he carried the sacred responsibility of being the clan's Skald, the keeper of their history, the voice of their triumphs and sorrows. Eirik pushed himself from his bed of furs, the bone amulet around his neck clicking softly against his chest as he moved. Outside, the village was stirring to life beneath a steel-gray sky. He pulled his woolen tunic over his head, fastened his leather trousers, and wrapped his wolfskin cloak tightly around his broad shoulders before stepping out into the biting cold. The snow crunched beneath his worn boots as he made his way through the village. His breath formed small clouds before him, dissipating into the frigid air like the fleeting nature of life itself. Children scampered between longhouses, their laughter a stark contrast to the solemn faces of the adults preparing for another day of survival. At the smithy, Gunnar hammered relentlessly at a blade, each strike sending sparks dancing into the air. Women gathered at the well, their voices hushed as they exchanged whispers of concern about the growing tensions with neighboring clans. "Skald!" called out old Sigrid, her weathered face creasing into a smile as she beckoned him closer. "Will you honor us with a tale at tonight's gathering, something to lift our spirits in these dark times?" Eirik nodded respectfully. "Perhaps the saga of Thorvald One-Eye and his journey beyond the western seas," he suggested, knowing the elders enjoyed tales of exploration and distant lands during the confines of winter. "Perfect," Sigrid replied, patting his arm with gnarled fingers. "The young ones need reminding of our ancestors' courage." As he continued his morning walk, Eirik felt the weight of unspoken words pressing against his chest. For weeks now, he had sensed something amiss in the relations between their jar, Halvar Bloodaxe, Eirik's own brother, and the neighboring chieftains. Fragments of conversations, abruptly silenced when he approached, messengers arriving under cover of darkness, warriors preparing their weapons with unusual urgency. As Skald, he was meant to know all that transpired within the clan, yet he felt increasingly isolated from these secretive dealings. He paused near the great hall, watching as his brother emerged, flanked by his most trusted warriors. Halvar's face was set in hard lines, his beard frosted with ice crystals from the morning air. Their eyes met briefly across the clearing, but Halvar quickly looked away, a gesture that sent a chill through Eirik, colder than any winter wind. Something was brewing, something that went unrecorded in the songs and sagas of their people. And for a Skald to be kept in ignorance was not merely an insult, it was a violation of ancient custom. Eirik was contemplating approaching his brother directly when a soft, urgent sound caught his attention. At first, he thought it might be a wounded animal, but as he turned toward the narrow passage between two storage buildings, he realized it was a human voice, faint and fearful. "Eirik, please!" The whisper was barely audible above the wind. He stepped cautiously into the shadowed space, his hand instinctively moving to the small knife at his belt. Pressed against the rough timber wall was a slight figure, Solveig, one of the thralls captured during last summer's raid on a coastal settlement. Her dark blonde hair had partially escaped its simple braid, framing a face marked by exhaustion and terror. In her trembling hands, she clutched a crumpled piece of parchment stained with what appeared to be mud and tears. "Help me," she pleaded, her green eyes darting nervously toward the open end of the passage, clearly terrified of being discovered. Eirik hesitated. Interacting with thralls beyond giving orders was uncommon enough, but to be seen conspiring with one could be interpreted as undermining the Jarl's authority, especially in these tense times. Yet something in the girl's desperate expression stirred something deep within him, something that transcended the rigid hierarchies that governed their lives. He crouched before her, instinctively making himself less threatening. "What troubles you, girl? Why seek me out?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Solveig's fingers tightened around the parchment. "This," she whispered, "I found it among the possessions of a merchant who stayed in our hall 3 nights past. He spoke in his sleep of betrayal and blood price. When he departed hastily before dawn, this fell from his belongings." She swallowed hard. "I cannot read the runes well, but I recognized names, our Jarl's name, and others. There is danger in these words." "You took this?" Eirik asked sharply. "Do you understand the punishment for theft from a guest?" "I do," she replied, a surprising steadiness entering her voice despite her obvious fear. "But I fear the punishment for silence would be far greater for everyone." Eirik studied her face, noting for the first time a small runic tattoo on her inner wrist, partially hidden by the frayed edge of her sleeve. It was an ancient symbol, one he recognized from the oldest sagas, the mark of the Skjolding clan, thought to have been wiped out generations ago in the blood feuds that had shaped their lands. His mind raced. To aid a thrall in any matter not commanded by her master was to invite suspicion. To conceal information that might affect the clan's safety was to betray his sacred duty as Skald. Yet to blindly deliver whatever this was to his increasingly secretive brother without understanding its contents first seemed equally dangerous. "Let me see," he said finally, extending his hand. With visible relief, Solveig passed him the parchment, her fingers brushing against his, cold as ice, yet somehow burning with urgency. Eirik unfolded the creased material, his eyes scanning the densely written runes. It was a poem, not the straightforward recording of events or agreements that might be expected in a merchant's papers, but a carefully crafted skaldic verse, rich with kennings and layered meanings. His breath caught as he began to decipher the cryptic metaphors. A wolf circling the sleeping bear, gold changing hands beneath Mani's eye, the serpent's poison in the mead cup, brothers' bonds severed by silver tongues. The implications were unmistakable to one trained in reading between the lines of poetic language. This was a record of treachery, of secret agreements between Ulfric Gudmundsson, Jarl of the neighboring wolf clan, and someone within Hrafnheim, someone close to Halvar, someone who had promised to open the gates when the attack came. "Do you understand it?" Solveig asked, her voice barely audible. Eirik looked up, meeting her gaze. "Enough to know why you feared bringing it directly to the jar," he said grimly. The traitor could be anyone in his inner circle. A sound from the main path caused Solveig to flinch violently. Voices approached, warriors by the sound of their boisterous conversation. Making a swift decision, Eirik tucked the parchment inside his tunic. "Come with me," he said, grasping her elbow. "Quickly and quietly. Keep your head down." He guided her through a series of narrow passages between buildings, avoiding the main pathways where they would be easily spotted. The girl moved with surprising stealth, her bare feet making no sound in the snow. Eirik led her toward the outskirts of the village, where his own dwelling stood. A modest structure compared to the great hall, but one that afforded him the privacy his role as Skald required. Once inside, he quickly stoked the embers in his hearth, adding dried moss and small twigs until flames licked upward. Solveig stood uncertainly near the door, her arms wrapped around herself, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Sit," Eirik instructed, gesturing toward a bench covered with furs. "Warm yourself." As she cautiously settled herself near the growing fire, Eirik retrieved a wooden cup and filled it with ale from a small barrel in the corner. He offered it to her, noting how her hands still trembled as she accepted it. "Now," he said, sitting across from her and removing the parchment from his tunic, "tell me everything. How did this merchant behave? Who did he speak with? What exactly did you hear him say in his sleep?" As Solveig spoke, Eirik studied the poem more carefully in the firelight. The verses were skillfully crafted, the work of a trained skald, not a common merchant. The metaphors were layered, references to ancient feuds interwoven with current alliances. But the message was becoming increasingly clear. Ulfric Gudmundsson had been promised support from within when he launched his attack on Hrafnheim, an attack that, according to the poem's timing, was imminent. "The merchant," Solveig continued, "spoke at length with Thorstein one hand during the evening meal." Eirik's jaw tightened. Thorstein was Halvar's most trusted advisor and war leader, a man who had fought alongside the Jarl for 20 winters. The implications were staggering. "And you're certain no one saw you take this?" he asked, his mind already racing ahead to the consequences if they were discovered. Solveig shook her head. "No one. The merchant had drunk heavily. When he began snoring, I was clearing the tables. It fell from his pouch when he shifted in his sleep. I shouldn't have looked at it, but something made me do so." She hesitated, then pushed up her sleeve, fully revealing the runic tattoo on her wrist. "Perhaps it was this, the blood of my ancestors calling to me." Eirik leaned forward, examining the mark more closely. "You're scolding," he said quietly. "I thought none survived the purge." "Few did," she replied, a hint of pride momentarily overcoming her fear. "My grandmother escaped with a handful of children. We lived quietly in a coastal village, hiding our true identities, until your brother's raid last summer." The pieces began falling into place in Eirik's mind. The Scolding clan had once been allies of the Wolf clan. If Ulfric knew of Solveig's presence here and her true identity, he might have planned to use her in some way during his attack. "Does my brother know what you are?" he asked sharply. "No," she said. "No one here does. The mark is usually hidden by my sleeve, and none would recognize it anyway. The Scolding have been gone from these lands for generations." Eirik rose and began pacing the small confines of his dwelling, the parchment clutched in his hand.
As Skald, his duty was clear, to bring any threat against the clan directly to the Jarl. But if Thorstein was indeed the traitor mentioned in the poem, taking this information to Halvar while his war leader is present could be disastrous.
Yet keeping such knowledge to himself, even temporarily, could be considered an act of treachery in itself, and harboring a thrall who had stolen from a guest, regardless of the circumstances, would only compound his offense in the eyes of the clan. "You've placed us both in grave danger," he said finally, turning back to Solveig. She met his gaze steadily. "We were already in danger. Now at least we know of it." Outside, the wind had intensified, howling around the eaves of the small building, like the wolves that gave Ulfric's clan their name. Eirik moved to the single window, pushing aside the oiled skin that covered it. Through the small opening, he could see warriors gathering near the great hall, more than would be typical for a normal day. Something was stirring. "You'll stay here," he decided. "I need to learn more before approaching my brother. If Thorstein is indeed plotting with Ulfric, I must find proof that even Halvar cannot ignore." "And if someone comes looking for me?" Solveig asked. Eirik considered this. A missing thrall would eventually be noticed, though with the household's focus on the gathering warriors, it might not happen immediately. "If anyone comes, hide beneath the sleeping platform," he instructed. "I'll return as soon as I can." He tucked the parchment securely inside his tunic again, ensuring it wouldn't be easily dislodged. Then he reached for his staff, a length of ash wood carved with runes and topped with a stylized raven's head, the symbol of his office as Skald. "Bar the door behind me," he told Solveig. "Open it for no one but me." As he stepped back into the cold, Eirik felt the weight of the parchment against his chest like a burning coal. The wind had picked up, driving needles of ice against his face as he made his way back toward the center of the village. Warriors hurried past him, their expressions grim, hands never straying far from their weapons. Near the smithy, Eirik spotted Gunnar working feverishly, hammering out what appeared to be arrowheads rather than the farming tools that should have occupied him at this time of year. The smith looked up as Eirik approached, sweat freezing on his brow despite the heat of the forge. "Strange days, Skald," Gunnar muttered, plunging a finished arrowhead into a bucket of snow. The metal hissed angrily, sending up a plume of steam. "Orders from above, all hands to prepare for battle, though against whom none will say." "Has word come of raiders?" Eirik asked carefully, probing for information without revealing his suspicions. Gunnar shrugged his massive shoulders. "If it has, the Jarl keeps his own counsel. But Thorstein has been organizing the warriors since before dawn, checking weapons, assigning positions along the palisade." He lowered his voice. "Some say there's been movement in the forests to the north. Wolf clan scouts, perhaps, though winter is an odd time for Ulfric to be testing our borders." Not if he expected the gates to be opened from within, Eirik thought grimly. "Have you spoken with your brother?" Gunnar asked, his hammer pausing mid-strike. "Surely the Skald should be composing the victory verses before battle, not wandering the village unaware." The observation stung, confirming Eirik's growing sense of being deliberately exploded from whatever was unfolding. "I seek him now," he replied, trying to keep the bitterness from his voice. As he continued toward the great hall, Eirik noticed small groups of villagers huddled in doorways, their expressions anxious as they watched the increased activity of the warriors. Whatever was happening, it had not yet been explained to the common folk. Another break with tradition that set alarm bells ringing in Eirik's mind. At the entrance to the hall, he was stopped by 2 guards, an unprecedented occurrence that caused his suspicion to deepen further.
"The Jarl is in council," said Bjorn Harry Breeks, a burly warrior who had once been Erik's childhood friend. "None to enter until summoned." "I am Skald," Eirik replied, drawing himself up. "The council is my place as much as any warrior's." Bjorn shifted uncomfortably, not meeting Erik's eyes. "Orders, Brazo-de-Corvo. The Jarl's orders specifically." Before Eirik could argue further, the heavy wooden door swung open, and Thorstein One Hand emerged. The war leader's single eye narrowed at the sight of Eirik, his scarred face twisting into what might have been a smile or a grimace. "Ah, the Skald seeks entrance," he said, his voice carrying a mocking edge that had become increasingly common in recent moons. "Patience, word weaver. Your brother will summon you when tales need telling. For now we discuss matters of blood and iron, not songs and pretty phrases." Eirik felt heat rise to his face, but he forced himself to remain outwardly calm. "Strange that the recorder of our clan's deeds should be excluded from knowledge of those very deeds, Thorstein. Some might wonder what actions require such secrecy that even the Skald must be kept ignorant." Something dangerous flickered in Thorstein's single eye. "Mind your place, Brazo-de-Corvo. Your brother's blood may flow in your veins, but that will not protect you if you overstep." The threat hung in the air between them, naked and unmistakable. In that moment, Eirik knew with certainty that the poem spoke truth. Thorstein was the traitor within their walls. "My place is beside my Jarl in times of danger," Eirik replied steadily. "As is yours, war leader. Let us hope we both remember where our loyalties truly lie." He turned and walked away before Thorstein could respond, feeling the man's gaze burning into his back like a brand. His mind raced. He needed to speak with Halvar alone, away from Thorstein's influence.
But how, when the war leader seemed determined to keep them separated? As he rounded the corner of the great hall, a small figure darted into his path. Thora, Halvar's daughter, her golden hair flying loose in the wind. At 20 winters, she had grown into a beauty that had already sparked talk of advantageous marriage alliances, though Halvar had thus far rejected all suitors. "Uncle," she exclaimed, her blue eyes bright with excitement that seemed at odds with the tense atmosphere pervading the village. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Eirik managed a smile for his niece, though his thoughts remained turbulent. "What is it, little raven?" he asked, using his childhood nickname for her. "Father has been closeted with his council since dawn," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "But I overheard something important. Can we speak somewhere private?" Eirik glanced around. The area near the great hall was too exposed, with warriors and villagers moving about in increasing numbers as the day progressed. "Come," he said, guiding her toward the storage buildings where smoked meats were kept for the winter. Between the largest structures was a narrow space, sheltered from both the wind and prying eyes. Once they were alone, Thora's excitement gave way to a more serious expression. "There's to be a meeting tonight," she said urgently. "Father has sent word to Ulfric Gudmundsson offering to discuss terms." Eirik felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Terms? What terms? "I don't know exactly," Thora admitted, "but Thorstein argued against it fiercely. I heard him tell Father that Ulfric cannot be trusted, that he would come with hidden steel beneath his cloak of peace." She frowned. It seemed strange, almost as if he were trying too hard to prevent the meeting. Which would make sense if Thorstein had already promised Ulfric that there would be no need for negotiations, that the gates would be opened from within when the time came. "Where is this meeting to take place?" Eirik asked, his mind already formulating a plan. "At the old stone circle at moonrise," Thora replied. "Father will take only a small honor guard. He wants to show good faith." Her expression grew troubled. "Uncle, I fear for him. There's something not right about all this. Thorstein has been whispering in his ear for weeks now, turning him against old friends, even against you." Eirik placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, though he felt far from reassured himself. "Thank you for telling me this, Thora. You've done well. Now return to the hall before you're missed, and speak of this to no one else." She nodded, squeezing his hand briefly before slipping away, her slender figure soon lost among the bustling villagers. Eirik remained in the sheltered space for several moments, considering his options. The stone circle lay a short distance from the village, an ancient place, raised by hands long forgotten, where important meetings had been held for generations. If Halvar intended to negotiate with Ulfric there tonight, it could be Eirik's opportunity to expose Thorstein's treachery before it was too late. But he would need evidence. The poem alone might not be enough, especially given his increasingly strained relationship with his brother. And there was still the matter of Solveig, hidden in his dwelling, whose very presence could undermine any accusations he made against Thorstein. As he emerged from his hiding place, Eirik noticed increased activity near the village gates. Warriors were gathering, checking their weapons, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Among them stood Thorstein, issuing orders with sharp gestures of his one hand, his expression grim and determined. Eirik kept to the shadows, watching. This was no preparation for a peaceful meeting. This was the positioning of men expecting battle. Had Thorstein convinced Halvar to set a trap for Ulfric at the stone circle? Or was this the beginning of the betrayal, with warriors being directed away from where the real attack would come? He needed to return to his dwelling, to study the poem more carefully and decide on his next move. But as he turned to leave, he found his path blocked by 3 of Thorstein's most loyal men. "Skald," said the leader, a scarred veteran named Gorm. "The war leader requires your presence." Eirik's hand instinctively moved to where the parchment lay hidden against his chest. "For what purpose?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice neutral. "That's for him to say," Gorm replied, his hand resting meaningfully on the hilt of his sword. "Will you come willingly, or must we escort you with less dignity?" Trapped and with few options, Eirik nodded curtly. "Lead on," he said, his mind racing to formulate a plan. Whatever happened, he could not allow Thorstein to discover the poem, or learn of Solveig's presence in his dwelling. The warriors led him not to the great hall as expected, but toward Thorstein's own house, a substantial structure near the eastern palisade. As they approached, Eirik noticed unusual activity. Men loading supplies onto sledges, women packing belongings. It had the unmistakable appearance of preparation for departure or evacuation. Inside Thorstein's dwelling, the war leader himself stood over a table strewn with maps and small carved figures representing warriors. He looked up as Eirik was brought before him, his single eye glittering in the firelight. "Leave us," he commanded the guards, who promptly withdrew, closing the door behind them. For a long moment, the 2 men regarded each other in silence, the crackling of the hearth fire the only sound in the room. Finally, Thorstein spoke. "You've been asking questions, Skald, poking your nose where it doesn't belong." He moved around the table, his gait predatory.
Normally I'd admire such thoroughness in the clan's record-keeper, but these are not normal times. Indeed they are not, Eirik replied carefully. When the Skald is deliberately kept ignorant of matters vital to the clan's welfare, one might say times are most abnormal. Thorstein's mouth twisted into a humorless smile. Always the clever words. That's what your brother could never understand about you, Brazo-de-Corvo. Your belief that words hold power equal to steel. He reached the hearth and prodded the fire with an iron poker. But he sees clearer now. He understands that in times like these, a jarl needs men of action at his side, not poets. And what times are these exactly? Eirik asked, his eyes darting briefly to the maps on the table. Times of negotiation with Ulfric Gudmundsson, or times of something else entirely? A flash of surprise crossed Thorstein's face before he could mask it. You've been busy indeed, he said, his voice hardening. Tell me, Skald, what else do you think you know? Eirik decided to take a calculated risk. I know that a meeting is planned for tonight at the Stone Circle. I know that despite this talk of peace, warriors prepare for battle. And I know that not all within Hrafnheim's walls hold loyalty to their jarl above other considerations. Thorstein's expression darkened. Careful, word weaver. Accusations of treachery are not made lightly, nor forgotten quickly. I make no accusations, Eirik replied smoothly. I merely observe, as is my duty as Skald. The war leader studied him intently, as if trying to determine exactly how much Eirik knew. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision. Your duty, he said, is to record what you are told to record, nothing more. He returned to the table, placing both hands flat upon it. Tonight, Halvar meets with Ulfric to discuss terms of alliance against the southern clans.
It is a delicate negotiation, one that requires careful handling. Alliance? Eirik couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. With the Wolf clan, after generations of blood feud? The world changes, Skald. Old enemies become new friends when faced with common threats. Thorstein's face was unreadable. Your brother understands this. He will do what must be done to ensure Hrafnheim's survival in the coming storm. Eirik's mind raced. This contradicted everything in the poem, which clearly spoke of betrayal, not alliance. Either Thorstein was lying now, or a terrible thought occurred to him. What if Salveg had been planted in their midst, her scolding heritage making her a perfect tool for Ulfric's manipulations? What if he had been maneuvered into exactly this position of suspicion and doubt, driving a wedge between himself and his brother at the most critical moment? You seem troubled, Brazo-de-Corvo, Thorstein observed, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Perhaps you begin to understand how your interference might be misinterpreted, how it might undermine your brother's authority at a crucial time. Eirik forced his features into neutrality. I understand my duty to the clan, he said carefully, and to my jarl. Good, Thorstein nodded. Then you will remain here until after tonight's meeting. For your own safety, of course. These are dangerous times, and a Skald's place is not on the battlefield.
In other words, Eirik realized, he was being confined, prevented from warning Halvar of his suspicions or attending the meeting at the stone circle. "And if I refuse this protection?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Thorstein's hand moved to his sword hilt. "Then I would be forced to conclude that your loyalties lie elsewhere, and act accordingly." Trapped and with few options, Eirik nodded slowly. "I see. Then I accept your hospitality, war leader." Thorstein smiled thinly.
"Wise choice, Skald. Guards," he called, and the door immediately opened to reveal the waiting warriors. "Our guest will be staying with us until morning. See that he's comfortable, but vigilant." As the guards escorted him to a small side chamber, Eirik's thoughts churned with uncertainty and growing dread. He had been outmaneuvered, separated from both Halvar and Solveig. And with moonrise approaching, time was running out to prevent whatever was truly planned for the stone circle that night. The chamber he was led to was sparsely furnished, little more than a storage room with a narrow pallet added as an afterthought. The single small window was shuttered against the cold, and as the door closed behind him, he heard the unmistakable sound of a bar being placed across it. Eirik moved immediately to the window, working his fingers around the edges of the shutters. They were secured from the outside, impossible to open from within. The walls were solid timber, the door thick oak. He was well and truly trapped. Or was he? Eirik had not spent his life studying the sagas of his people without learning something of resourcefulness in desperate situations. He examined every corner of the small space, searching for anything that might serve as a tool or weapon. Under the pallet, he discovered a forgotten knife, small and rusty, but with an edge that might still serve. Whether left by carelessness or providence, it represented his only chance. Outside, he could hear the continued preparations, the movement of men and equipment, orders being shouted, the neighing of horses being readied. Through a crack in the shutters, he could see the sky beginning to darken as afternoon waned toward evening. Moonrise was perhaps 2 hours away. Using the knife, Eirik carefully worked at the bindings that held the shutters closed. It was slow, painstaking work, and twice he was forced to hide the knife and feign sleep when guards checked on him through a small viewing slot in the door. By the time he managed to loosen the shutters enough to force them open, the village had grown quieter. Most of the warriors, he guessed, had already departed for the stone circle with Halvar, or been positioned elsewhere by Thorstein for whatever he truly planned. The window was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through, but Eirik was lean from a lifetime of valuing words over warfare. With a final glance toward the door, he pulled himself up and through the opening, dropping silently into the snow below. The village was eerily deserted, with only a few guards visible near the main gates. Most concerning was what Eirik didn't see, any sign of Thorstein or his most loyal men. They were neither among those who had departed with Halvar, nor visible anywhere within the village perimeter. Moving from shadow to shadow, Eirik made his way swiftly toward his own dwelling. He needed to check on Solveig, to determine once and for all if she was victim or accomplice in whatever scheme was unfolding. As he approached his home, however, a sense of wrongness prickled at the back of his neck. The door stood slightly ajar, moving gently in the evening breeze. Eirik had specifically instructed Solveig to bar it from within. Drawing the small knife, he approached cautiously, pushing the door open with his foot.
The interior was dark, the fire having died down to embers that cast only the faintest red glow across the room. "Salveg," he called softly, stepping inside. There was no answer, but as his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he could make out signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, scattered belongings. And there, near the hearth, a darker patch on the earthen floor that he knew instinctively was blood. Eirik quickly rekindled the fire, confirming his fears as the flames illuminated the scene. Someone had taken Salveg, forcibly, from the evidence before him.
But who? Thorstein's men? Or someone else entirely? A soft sound from the sleeping platform caused him to whirl, knife raised defensively. To his shock, a figure emerged from beneath it. Not Solveig, but his niece Thora, her face pale with terror, a shallow cut on her forehead seeping blood. "Uncle," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They came for her. Ulfric's men. They knew she was here." Eirik helped her to a bench, quickly examining her wound. "How badly are you hurt? What happened?" "I'm fine," Thora insisted, though she winced as he dabbed at the cut with a clean cloth. "I came to find you, to warn you. I overheard Thorstein speaking with a stranger after you were taken away. They mentioned a thrall girl and a poem." She swallowed hard. "When I couldn't find you, I came here, thinking you might have returned. The girl was here alone. Then Ulfric's men broke in, 4 of them, wearing wolf pelts over their armor. They demanded the poem, but she refused to tell them where it was. They were hurting her, Uncle." Tears welled in Thora's eyes. "I tried to stop them, but one of them struck me. When I regained my senses, they were gone, and so was she." Eric's blood ran cold. "How long ago?" "Not long. The coals were still hot when I awoke." Thora clutched his arm. "Uncle, what's happening? Why would Ulfric's men be inside our walls? Where are our warriors?" "Divided and misled," Eirik replied grimly, his hand going to the parchment still hidden within his tunic. "Your father rides to the stone circle, expecting to negotiate an alliance, while—" He hesitated, still uncertain of the war leader's true role in all this. "Thorstein is gone," Thora said, confirming Erik's worst fears. "He and his closest followers left through the eastern postern gate shortly after you were confined. No one questioned him. They assumed he acted on father's orders." The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Thorstein had betrayed them all. Not just Halvar, but Ulfric as well. The war leader was playing both jarls against each other, perhaps aiming to claim leadership of both clans in the aftermath of their mutual destruction. "We must warn your father," Eirik said, rising quickly. "The meeting at the stone circle is a trap, but not the one he expects." "We'll never reach him in time on foot," Thora pointed out. "The stone circle is half a league away, and they left on horseback." Eirik thought quickly. "The stables. There must be some horses left, and we'll need weapons." Together they slipped out into the gathering darkness. The village remained unnaturally quiet, with most of its defenders either accompanying Halvar or positioned according to Thorstein's deceptive orders. At the stables they found 2 horses remaining, not the finest in the clan's herd, but serviceable. As Thora prepared them, Eirik broke into the armory, taking a sword, shield, and bow with a quiver of arrows. "You should stay here," he told Thora as he returned to the stables. "Find Gunnar and any warriors still loyal to your father. Tell them what's happening and have them secure the village." Thora's jaw set stubbornly as she mounted one of the horses. "My father faces death, Uncle. My place is at his side, as is yours." Her hand went to a small knife at her belt. "I am not helpless." Eirik knew better than to argue.
Like her father, once Thora made up her mind, she was immovable as the mountains. With a curt nod, he mounted the second horse, and together they rode out through the western gate, the lone guard too surprised by their haste to raise an alarm. The night had fully descended, but the moon was rising, a silver crescent that provided just enough light to follow the well-worn path toward the stone circle. They rode hard, the horses' hooves throwing up clods of snow, their breath steaming in the frigid air.
There, Thora pointed suddenly, and Eirik saw them, dark figures moving through the trees parallel to the path, at least a dozen warriors in wolfskin cloaks. Ulfric's men positioning themselves to surround the stone circle. "Stay close," Eirik warned, urging his mount to greater speed. They had to reach Halvar before the trap closed completely. The stone circle appeared before them, massive monoliths rising from the snow-covered ground like the fingers of buried giants reaching for the sky. In the center, torches had been placed, illuminating a scene of impending confrontation. Halvar stood with his honor guard of 6 warriors, facing Ulfric Gudmundsson and a similar number of Wolf Clan fighters. The 2 jarls appeared to be in heated discussion, hands never far from their weapons, tension visible in every line of their bodies. And, moving stealthily through the shadows beyond the torchlight, Eirik could make out more figures, Thorstein and his loyalists, positioning themselves to strike when the conflict between the jarls erupted. There was no time for subtlety. Eirik urged his horse forward, bursting into the circle, with Thora close behind. "Treachery!" he shouted, his voice carrying in the still night air. "Halvar, Ulfric, you are both betrayed!" All heads turned toward them, expressions of shock and anger visible in the flickering torchlight. Halvar's hand went to his axe. "Brother, what madness is this?" "The madness of Thorstein One Hand," Eirik replied, dismounting swiftly and moving to stand between the 2 groups of warriors. "He plays you both false. Even now, his men surround us, waiting for you to begin killing each other so they may finish whoever remains." Ulfric's scarred face twisted in skepticism. "Bold claims, Skald. Where is your proof?" In answer, Eirik pulled the parchment from his tunic, holding it high. "Here, a poem recording Thorstein's treachery, found by a thrall girl in the belongings of a merchant who visited our hall. A girl who now lies captured or dead by Ulfric's men, who breached our walls while our defenders were scattered by Thorstein's orders." Ulfric's expression darkened. "My men have breached no walls, Skald. I came here in good faith, with only my honor guard, as agreed." "Then who took the girl?" Thora demanded, moving to stand beside Eirik. 4 warriors wearing wolf pelts attacked your dwelling, uncle. I saw them with my own eyes." A low laugh echoed from the darkness beyond the stones. Thorstein stepped into the torchlight, flanked by his men, all wearing hastily donned wolf pelts over their usual garb. "Clever, clever Skald," he said, slow applause punctuating his words. "But too late, as usual. Your words may have prevented these fools from killing each other immediately, but the night is still young." Halvar's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "Thorstein? What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, Jarl," Thorstein replied, emphasizing the title mockingly, "is that I tire of serving lesser men. Hrafnheim deserves stronger leadership, as does the Wolf Clan." His single eye gleamed with ambition. "When you both lie dead, along with your most loyal followers, who will the survivors turn to but the man who warned of treachery from the other side? The man who avenged their fallen Jarl? You would set clan against clan, kinsman against kinsman, for your own ambition?" Eirik asked, disgust evident in his voice.
I would unite what has been divided, Thorstein countered. Under proper leadership, our combined strength would make us invincible against the southern clans that press ever northward. He drew his sword. But enough talk. You've all served your purpose by coming here tonight. At his signal, his men emerged fully from the shadows, 20 warriors at least, all armed and ready for slaughter. They had the advantage of numbers and surprise, surrounding the stone circle completely.
Halvar and Ulfric exchanged glances, enemies for a lifetime, now faced with a common threat. Without words, an understanding passed between them. They moved to stand back to back, their honor guards forming a defensive circle around them. "You forget, Thorstein," Halvar said, his voice steady despite the dire situation. "What makes a true leader? Not ambition, not cunning, but honor. Something you clearly lack." Eirik positioned himself protectively in front of Thora, sword drawn, though he had little hope of surviving what was to come. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1, caught in the open with limited defenses. "Honor," Thorstein laughed harshly. "Honor is the luxury of the victorious, Halvar. The defeated have only shame and death." He raised his sword high. "Take them!" His men surged forward from all sides, weapons glinting in the moonlight. The clash of steel on steel shattered the night silence as Halvar, Ulfric, and their warriors met the attack with desperate courage. Eirik found himself facing 2 attackers at once, his sword moving frantically to parry their blows. Behind him, he could hear Thora's quick breathing as she clutched her small knife, ready to sell her life dearly. The battle was chaotic, confined within the ancient stones that seemed to watch the bloodshed with the impassivity of ages. Eirik managed to wound one attacker, but the second pressed him hard, forcing him back step by step. A scream cut through the din of battle, Halvar's voice filled with pain and rage. Eirik turned instinctively toward the sound, and in that moment of distraction, his opponent's blade slipped past his guard, slicing into his side. Pain exploded through him, but survival instinct kept his sword arm moving, deflecting a killing blow. He stumbled, falling to one knee, blood soaking his tunic. "Uncle!" Thora cried, rushing to his side despite the danger. Through a haze of pain, Eirik saw Halvar locked in combat with Thorstein himself, both men bloodied but still fighting fiercely. Ulfric and his warriors had formed a tight knot of resistance on the other side of the circle, surrounded but not yet overwhelmed. "The poem," Eirik gasped, pressing the blood-stained parchment into Thora's hands. "Keep it safe. It's the proof, the truth." A horn blast suddenly echoed through the night, 3 long notes that Eirik recognized as the signal for reinforcements. But whose? From the darkness beyond the stone circle came the thunder of hooves and the battle cries of fresh warriors. Thorstein's head snapped up in alarm as riders burst into the clearing. Gunnar the smith at their head, leading what appeared to be every remaining warrior from Hrafnheim. "For the Jarl!" Gunnar roared, his massive warhammer crushing the skull of the nearest traitor. The tide of battle shifted instantly. Caught between Halvar and Ulfric's forces on one side and the new arrivals on the other, Thorstein's men began to falter. Eirik struggled to his feet, determined not to die on his knees. The wound in his side burned like fire, but he forced himself to stand, sword raised. Across the chaotic battlefield, he locked eyes with Thorstein. The war leader's face contorted with hatred as he disengaged from Halvar, cutting down one of Ulfric's men who stood in his path as he charged toward Eirik. "You," Thorstein snarled, his blade whistling through the air.
always interfering, always undermining with your cursed words and questions. Eirik parried the blow, though the impact sent shockwaves of pain through his injured body. "Words have power, Thorstein," he gasped. "The power of truth, something you never understood." They exchanged a flurry of blows, Eirik diving ground, his strength waning with each passing moment. He knew he could not defeat Thorstein in his current condition. The war leader was both stronger and uninjured.
But he didn't need to win, only to survive long enough for help to reach him. And it was coming. Through the melee, he could see Halvar fighting his way toward them, his face a mask of fury as he realized Thorstein's target. With a desperate lunge, Thorstein drove his sword forward. Eirik twisted aside, the blade slicing air where his heart had been a moment before. The movement caused his wounded side to tear further, and he stumbled, his own sword drooping. Thorstein grinned triumphantly, raising his weapon for the killing stroke. "Die, knowing you failed, Skald. I'll compose the verse of your death myself, a fitting end for a man who valued words over strength." The sword began its downward arc, but never completed its journey. A small figure darted between them, knife flashing in the torchlight. Thora, her face set in determined lines, drove her blade into Thorstein's unprotected side. The war leader's eyes widened in shock and pain. His sword stroke went wide, and he staggered back, clutching at the wound. "You little bitch," he gasped, blood bubbling between his fingers. "For my father," Thora said simply, standing her ground despite the danger. "And for the truth." Thorstein lunged for her with his remaining strength, but before he could reach her, an axe buried itself in his back with a sickening thud. Halvar stood behind him, his face a study in cold fury. "For the clan," the Jarl said quietly, as Thorstein fell face first into the bloodied snow. With their leader fallen, the remaining traitors lost heart. Some threw down their weapons in surrender, while others fled into the darkness, pursued by Gunnar's riders. Eirik sank to his knees, the strength finally leaving him as the immediate danger passed. Thora was instantly at his side, pressing a cloth against his wound, her face pale with concern. "Hold on, uncle," she urged. "The wound is deep but clean. We'll get you home." Halvar approached, his own injuries evident but not life-threatening. He knelt beside his brother, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You saved us all," he said simply. "Forgive me for doubting you." Eirik managed a weak smile. "Brothers quarrel," he replied. "It's the way of things. But in the end, blood calls to blood." Ulfric Gudmundsson joined them, his scarred face solemn. "The girl," he said without preamble, "the one who found the poem. My scouts reported seeing Thorstein's men taking a captive toward the eastern ridge before we arrived for the meeting. If she still lives, she would be there." Halvar nodded grimly. "We'll find her." He turned to Gunnar, who stood nearby. "Organize a search party, comb the eastern ridge, and bring Thorstein's surviving followers for judgment." As warriors moved to obey, Halvar helped Eirik to his feet, supporting him with a strong arm. "Come, brother, let's return home. There is much to discuss, and many songs to compose about this night's work." The journey back to Hrafnheim was slow and painful for Eirik, but as they approached the village gates, a sense of completion filled him despite his physical suffering. The truth had been revealed, treachery exposed. His duty as Skald had been fulfilled in the most profound way possible. In the great hall, the village healer tended to Eirik's wounds, while Halvar recounted the night's events to the assembled clan members.
The atmosphere was a complex mixture of relief, grief for those lost, and anger at the betrayal. As dawn approached, the search party returned, with Solveig among them, battered and exhausted, but alive. She had been found bound in an abandoned hunting lodge, left to freeze to death in the bitter cold. When she saw Eirik, she rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face. "You kept it safe," she whispered, touching the blood-stained parchment that still rested near him. "You believed when no one else would." "Truth is a Skald's only loyalty," Eirik replied, wincing as he shifted on his pallet, "even above clan or brother."
In the days that followed, many changes came to Hrafnheim. The surviving traitors were exiled, sent into the wilderness with only the clothes on their backs, a fate many considered worse than a clean death by the axe. More surprisingly, Halvar and Ulfric formalized the alliance that Thorstein had tried to prevent, not through coercion or fear, but through mutual respect born in shared battle. The blood feud that had separated their clans for generations was set aside, sealed with promises of trade and mutual defense. Solveig, her scolding heritage now known to all, was freed from thraldom and given a place of honor in the clan. Her knowledge of the old ways and keen intelligence quickly made her valuable beyond her status as the one who had discovered the plot. And Eirik, once his wounds had healed enough for him to stand before the fire in the great hall, composed the saga of that fateful night, a complex verse that spoke of betrayal and redemption, of brothers divided and reunited, of the power of truth to cut through even the darkest deceptions. "Words are weapons," he told the rapt listeners as he concluded his tale, "sometimes sharper than steel, sometimes more enduring than stone. They can destroy or heal, divide or unite. But unlike blades, they reveal the hand that wields them, for good or ill." As winter gave way to spring, life in Hrafnheim settled into new patterns. The alliance with the Wolf clan brought prosperity and security, allowing both communities to focus on growth rather than defense. Eirik often found himself watching Solveig as she moved about the village, her confidence growing with each passing day. Something had formed between them during those desperate hours, a bond forged in danger and truth that transcended their different origins. One evening, as they walked along the ridge overlooking the fjord, the setting sun painting the water with gold and crimson, Solveig stopped suddenly, turning to face him. "You never asked what became of the merchant who dropped the poem," she said, her green eyes searching his face, "the one who first brought the warning." Eirik had indeed wondered, but had been consumed with more immediate concerns during his recovery. What did become of him? Solveig smiled, a hint of mischief in her expression. "There was no merchant," she said softly. "I wrote the poem myself." Eirik stared at her in astonishment. "You? But how could you know of Thorstein's plans?" "I didn't, not specifically," she admitted, "but I observed. I listened when no one thought a thrall worth noticing. I saw Thorstein meeting secretly with strangers in the forest. I heard fragments of conversations about divided loyalties and perfect opportunities." She looked down at the runic tattoo on her wrist. "And I knew what it was to be used as a pawn in men's games of power." "So you created the poem," Eirik said slowly, understanding dawning, "knowing that as Skald I would be most likely to recognize its importance and act upon it." She nodded. "I couldn't approach Halvar directly. Who would believe a thrall accusing his most trusted war leader? But you—" Her hand touched his arm lightly.
You see beyond rank and status. You listen to the words themselves, not just who speaks them. Eirik was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. Finally, he smiled. Then it seems I owe you more than my life. I owe you my purpose. For what is a skald but one who finds truth in verses and shares it with the world? As they continued their walk, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky above, Eirik felt a sense of rightness that had been absent for too long. The poem that had nearly destroyed his clan had instead renewed it, washing away old corruptions and allowing new growth, like spring floods clearing winter's debris.
And in that renewal, he had found not just his voice as Skald, but something more precious still, a partner who understood that in a world of steel and strength, words remained the most enduring power of all. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.